In the long history of the Byzantine Empire, few rulers loom as large
as Emperor Justinian I. To some, he was the last great Roman, a man determined to restore the glory of an ancient world. To others, he was an overambitious ruler whose endless wars and grand projects nearly exhausted his empire. But whether admired or criticized, Justinian's reign changed the course of history in ways that can still be felt today. Tonight, we are going to step back into the 6th century, into a world of golden domes, religious conflict, imperial ambition, and deadly plague. A world where one man sought nothing less than to rebuild the Roman Empire itself. This is the story of Justinian, his rise, his victories, his failures, and the complicated legacy he left behind. To understand Justinian, we first need to understand the world he inherited. By the time he came to power, the Western Roman Empire had already fallen. Rome itself had been sacked, and the old Western provinces were ruled by various Germanic kingdoms. The empire survived only in the east, centered around the wealthy and magnificent city of Constantinople. Although modern historians call it the Byzantine Empire, the people living there still considered themselves Romans. They spoke Greek increasingly often, but their laws, their bureaucracy, and their military traditions were deeply Roman. They believed their emperor was God's chosen ruler on earth, tasked with maintaining a divine order. Into this world, around the year 482, Justinian was born. His original name was Petrus Sabatius, and he was born in a rural region near present-day North Macedonia. He was likely from a peasant family, but his life changed forever because of his uncle Justin. Justin was a man of humble origins who had walked to Constantinople with nothing but a bag of dried bread on his back. Through sheer grit, he rose through the military ranks to become commander of the imperial guard. When Emperor Anastasius died in 518, Justin seized the throne. Justin was a soldier, not a scholar. It was said he was illiterate and needed a stencil to sign his own name, so he relied heavily on his nephew. Justinian was highly educated in law, theology, and administration. He was disciplined, ambitious, and deeply religious. He became the real power behind the government long before he was officially crowned in 527. Justinian's reign was defined by a partnership that shocked the Roman aristocracy. One of the most remarkable figures of the age was his wife, Empress Theodora. Her background was a scandal. She had once worked as an actress and a performer in the Hippodrome, a profession associated with low social status. The historian Procopius, in his Secret History, describes her early life in terms so harsh they are almost certainly exaggerated, fueled by the elitist resentment of the old senatorial class. Whatever the truth of her youth, Theodora was extraordinarily intelligent and politically skilled. Justinian fell so deeply in love with her that he had the law changed to allow a noble to marry an actress. As empress, she was no ceremonial figure. She influenced policy, met with foreign ambassadors, and proved to be the more courageous of the two during the empire's darkest hours. No crisis tested them more than the Nika Riots of 532. In Constantinople, the city was divided into chariot racing factions known as the Blues and the Greens. These were more than sports fans, they were political organizations. When the two factions united against Justinian's heavy taxation, the city exploded into violence. For days, the crowds shouted Nika, meaning victory, as they burned government buildings. Justinian panicked and prepared to flee the city by ship, but Theodora refused to move. In a speech that has echoed through history, she told him that royal purple makes a fine burial shroud, saying it was better to die as an empress than to live as a fugitive. Shamed into action, Justinian ordered his generals, Belisarius and Mundus, to the Hippodrome. The soldiers trapped 30,000 rioters inside and massacred them. The revolt was crushed, but much of the city lay in ruins. From those ashes, Justinian began a building program that would redefine the skyline of the world. His crowning achievement was the Hagia Sophia, or the Church of Holy Wisdom. It was built in just 5 years, a speed that was unheard of for such a massive structure. Its central dome was a masterpiece of engineering, designed to look as if it were suspended from heaven by a golden chain. When Justinian entered the completed cathedral, he reportedly cried out, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." The Hagia Sophia became the spiritual heart of the empire for nearly a millennium, a monument to the marriage of Roman engineering and Christian devotion. But Justinian's eyes were fixed on the west. He felt a divine mission to reclaim the lost provinces of Rome. To achieve this, he relied on General Belisarius, perhaps the most brilliant military mind of late antiquity. Belisarius was a man of immense talent and loyalty, though Justinian was often suspicious of his popularity. The first target was the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. The Vandals had ruled from Carthage for decades, but in a lightning-fast campaign starting in 533, Belisarius destroyed their kingdom and brought North Africa back into the imperial fold. It was a stunning success that encouraged Justinian to take on a much bigger prize: Italy. The Gothic War in Italy would be the longest and most devastating chapter of Justinian's reign. At first, Belisarius moved with his typical speed, capturing Sicily and eventually Rome itself. But the Ostrogoths were not easily defeated. The war dragged on for 20 years, turning the Italian peninsula into a wasteland. Rome was besieged and captured 5 times, its population plummeting. To fund these wars, Justinian had to squeeze his subjects for every copper coin. In the east, he had to pay massive amounts of gold to the Sassanid Persian Empire just to keep his eastern border secure. This eternal peace was anything but eternal. The Persians would later break it, sacking the great city of Antioch. The Sassanid Persians were the only superpower capable of meeting the Romans as equals. Their king, Khosrow I, was Justinian's great rival, a philosopher king who was just as ambitious. The two empires were locked in a dance of gold and steel. Justinian's strategy was often to buy time with subsidies to keep the Persians at bay while he fought in Italy. But this gold often just fueled the Persian war machine. When the Persians eventually bypassed the border fortresses, it proved that Justinian's dream of a restored West was leaving the heart of his empire vulnerable. This tension between the pull of the past in Rome and the reality of the threat in the East would haunt his entire reign. As if the wars were not enough, a silent killer arrived in 541. Today, we call it the Plague of Justinian. It was likely the bubonic plague, carried by fleas on rats that traveled with the grain ships. The capital was devastated. At its peak, historians estimate that thousands were dying every day in Constantinople. The emperor himself contracted the disease and fell into a coma, leaving Theodora to manage the empire while death stalked the streets. Justinian survived, but the empire did not recover as easily. The loss of life crippled the economy, weakened the army, and stalled the momentum of his conquests. The world became a darker, more fragile place. Beyond the battlefield, Justinian was also a tireless administrator. He was known as the emperor who never sleeps because of his legendary work ethic. He obsessed over the details of governance, trying to root out the deep-seated corruption of provincial governors. He believed that the empire's decline was due to a moral and administrative decay from within. He issued laws to protect the poor from the predatory, powerful, the wealthy landowners who were gobbling up peasant farms. While his success was limited, it showed a ruler who believed that a true Roman emperor was the guardian of justice for all his subjects. Despite the chaos, Justinian left behind a legacy that would outlast his wars: the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law. Roman law had become a tangled mess of centuries-old edicts. Justinian appointed a commission of scholars, led by the jurist Tribonian, to organize and standardize the law. This massive project preserved the best of Roman legal thought. Centuries later, when Europe began to emerge from the Middle Ages, they turned to Justinian's code to build their legal systems. The concepts of justice and equity found in his work are the ancestors of the laws we live under today. Religion was the other great pillar of his reign. Justinian saw himself as a priest-king, responsible for the souls of his subjects. He closed the last pagan schools in Athens, effectively ending the classical tradition of Greek philosophy that had begun with Socrates and Plato. He also spent decades trying to bridge the gap between different Christian factions. These theological debates about the nature of Christ may seem abstract today, but they were the source of deep social division. Ironically, while Justinian pushed for strict orthodoxy, Theodora often secretly protected dissenting groups, showing the complex balance of power within the palace. The internal life of the court was a place of high ritual and deep suspicion. Justinian was a man who trusted few people completely. He was famous for his mercurial nature, one moment rewarding a general, the next stripping him of his rank out of fear of a coup. This atmosphere of paranoia meant that even his most loyal servants, like Belisarius, were never entirely safe. It created a government that was highly efficient, but also deeply fearful, where success was often punished as much as failure. This internal friction slowed the empire's response to crises and ensured that Justinian would always be a lonely figure at the top of the imperial hierarchy. In his final years, Justinian was a man of shadows. Theodora died in 548, and the emperor never seemed the same. He became increasingly obsessed with religious minutiae and lived a life of extreme austerity. By the time he died in 565, at the age of 83, he had ruled for 38 years. He had reclaimed Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain. He had built the world's most beautiful church and written its most influential legal code. But he also left behind an empire that was financially exhausted and militarily overstretched. Within decades of his death, many of his conquests began to slip away. The Lombards invaded Italy, and the rise of Islam in the next century would eventually change the map of the Mediterranean forever.
Yet the Byzantine Empire survived for another 900
years, anchored by the systems and the capital that Justinian had reinforced. When we look at Justinian, we see a ruler standing at the edge of two worlds. He was the last emperor to dream of a united Mediterranean under Latin law, but he was also the first truly medieval monarch. He was a man of iron will who tried to make the world match his vision, and while he couldn't stop the tide of history, he left a mark so deep that we can still see it in the domes of Istanbul and the law books of the modern world. Thank you for watching Layback Historian. Until next time, take care and keep exploring the past.